Today is July 27th, 2026, and right now, as you are watching this, more than 1 million acres are burning across the state of Oregon. Let that number sit for a second, because it is not a typo, it is not a rounded estimate pulled from a headline, and it is not an exaggeration. 1 million acres in a single state, in a single season that has not even finished the month of July. That is not routine fire season coverage, and this is not the kind of update where I tell you to check your local air quality app and move on with your day. 34 large fires are active across the state at this exact moment, and in the last 72 hours, several of the biggest ones did something that changes the entire shape of this disaster for everyone living downwind or nearby. They merged. Separate fires, burning independently, closed the gap between them and became single, larger, more dangerous fire systems. I need you to understand what that actually means before we go any further, because a merger is not just two numbers being added together on a map. It is a fundamental change in how a fire behaves, how fast it moves, and how predictable it is for the crews trying to stop it. If you have family in Central Oregon, Eastern Oregon, or anywhere near the Warm Springs Reservation, Fossil, or Gilliam County right now, I want you to comment below and tell me what you are seeing on the ground, because the official updates are moving fast and local knowledge is saving lives this week. And if you have not subscribed yet, turn on notifications now, because I am tracking this hour by hour and the situation on the ground is shifting faster than most news outlets can keep up with. Let's walk back to how we got here, because the buildup matters as much as the headline. Oregon's fire season did not start this way. Governor Tina Kotek declared a statewide state of emergency back on June 16th, when the state had only logged about 414 fires covering roughly 8,000 acres. At the time, that declaration looked precautionary. 19 of Oregon's 36 counties were already sitting under drought emergency status, snowpack had melted early, and officials were warning that conditions were aligning in a way that demanded resources be pre-positioned before anything catastrophic happened. That is standard responsible emergency management. What nobody could have predicted in mid-June was how quickly that slow-building risk would detonate. The turn happened in the back half of July. A brutal combination of dry vegetation, shifting winds, and a wave of thunderstorms rolled through the state, and thunderstorms in dry country do not always bring relief. Sometimes they bring ignition. Fire officials have confirmed that more than 8,000 lightning strikes hit Oregon within a 72-hour window in mid-July, and that single atmospheric event sparked at least 75 new fires in Central Oregon alone. Stop and sit with that for a second. 8,000 lightning strikes is not a storm. It is an ignition event spread across an entire region simultaneously, and it is the reason this fire season went from merely concerning to genuinely historic in a matter of days. By July 20th, the Northwest Interagency Fire Center reported more than 415,000 acres actively burning in Oregon, across 26 large fires. For comparison, and I want you to actually hold this comparison in your head, the entire 2025 Oregon fire season, start to finish, burned 338,551 acres. Oregon had already burned past its entire previous year's total before the month of July was even over. That is the kind of a statistic that should stop you scrolling, because it tells you this season is not tracking like a bad year. It is tracking like a record year, and it is only the end of July. Here is where the story gets significantly worse, because acreage alone does not capture what has been happening on the ground for the past several days. Multiple major fires that were burning as separate incidents have now grown into each other and merged into single, larger fire complexes. And that is the development driving today's headline. The most immediate example is unfolding right now near Warm Springs in Jefferson County. The bench fire and the Beachcomb fire started as two distinct incidents, but officials confirmed this past Sunday that the two fires have ballooned in size and merged into what is now being tracked as a single fire, officially called the bench fire, currently sitting at 40,296 acres and 0% contained. Read that back one more time. 0%. That means fire crews have not yet been able to establish a single secure line around any part of this fire's perimeter. Matthew Wilcox, the public information officer for the Central West Zone Type 3 Incident Management Team, explained exactly how this fire broke free of control in the first place. He said the fire jumped the containment line that crews put in on the very first night, and from that point forward, it has been growing rapidly. That single sentence tells you everything about how fast conditions can flip on firefighters who are doing everything right and still losing ground to the wind and the fuel. The bench fire did not just grow, it moved. It jumped the Deschutes River, which is not a small obstacle, and it prompted thousands of residents on and around the Warm Springs Reservation to evacuate under Level 3 Go Now orders. Confirmed losses so far include 6 primary residences and 5 outbuildings, agricultural and non-residential structures, with damage assessments still ongoing as crews get closer access to burned areas. I want to be honest with you about something here. because a responsible tracker does not inflate numbers. Officials have not released a confirmed death toll for this fire as of today, and I am not going to speculate about one, because giving you a number I cannot verify would be worse than giving you no number at all. What I can tell you is that structural loss assessments in an active 0% contained fire are inherently incomplete. Damage assessment teams typically cannot safely enter a burned area until fire behavior has calmed enough that downed power lines, hotspots, and hazard trees no longer pose an immediate threat to the assessors themselves. Which means the 6 homes and 5 outbuildings confirmed lost so far should be read as a floor, not a ceiling. On the true damage picture, until crews can complete a full survey. What I can tell you is that a fire capable of jumping a river and overrunning an established containment line in a single night is a fire capable of catching people off guard. And that is precisely why the evacuation orders in that area have been aggressive and fast-moving all week. Now let's talk about what is happening at the same time, roughly 100 miles away, because this is not an isolated event. It is a pattern playing out across multiple parts of the state simultaneously, and understanding that pattern is the difference between panicking and actually being prepared. In Wheeler County, near the town of Fossil, 3 fires that were originally tracked separately, the Crosswhite Fire, the Brewer Fire, and the Green Mountain Fire, have merged into one larger fire area as part of what is now called the Rowe Creek Complex. As of today, the Rowe Creek Complex covers 209,546 acres, and containment currently sits at 35%. That containment number matters, and I will come back to why in a moment, because it is the clearest evidence we have that a merged fire, even one covering more ground than some entire counties, is not automatically an unstoppable fire. More than 1,300 personnel are assigned to this complex right now, along with 66 engines, 25 dozers, and 44 crews, and fire managers have been honest about a detail that most coverage glosses over. They cannot yet confirm the fire's true total acreage because an infrared mapping flight has not been able to fly the full perimeter. They are telling you plainly that they do not have perfect information yet, and I would rather give you that honest uncertainty than a clean, confident number that turns out to be wrong. Not every major fire burning right now has merged yet, and that distinction matters too. Near sisters, on the northern outskirts of a town that depends heavily on summer tourism, the Akawa Butte Fire is burning across more than 27,000 acres in Deschutes and Jefferson counties, and sits at just 6% contained. Firefighting aircraft have been running repeated retardant drops along its southeastern edge, close enough to residential neighborhoods that images from this week show air tankers flying directly over rooftops on the northern edge of town. Akawa Butte has not merged with a neighboring fire yet, but it is burning in the same wind-driven, low-humidity conditions that produced the bench fire merger, and fire managers are watching it closely for exactly that possibility. Further north, in Gilliam County, a similar merger has taken place within what is now called the Rowe Creek Complex. The Porcupine Ridge Fire has merged with the McInnes Fire, the 456 Fire, and the Wilcox Fire, combining into a fire system now covering more than 100,000 acres on its own. Evacuation levels in Gilliam County currently span the full range, Level 1, Level 2, and Level 3, across the western half of the county and extending into Wasco County, with travel restrictions in place along Highway 19. When you have 3 separate merger events happening in 3 separate parts of the state within the same week, that is not coincidence. That is the signature of a single statewide weather pattern, hot, dry, and wind-driven, acting on identical fuel conditions across multiple regions at once. Now here is where I want to slow down and actually explain the mechanism, because most coverage treats a fire merger as just a bigger number on a map, and that is not what is actually happening physically, and understanding the physics is what will help you make sense of everything that follows. A wildfire generates its own weather. As a fire burns, the intense heat causes the air directly above it to rise rapidly, creating a localized column of superheated, rising air. That rising column pulls in surrounding air to replace it, which increases oxygen supply to the fire and can accelerate combustion. When 2 fires are burning close enough to each other, their individual convective columns begin to interact. The rising air from each fire pulls air from the gap between them, and that inward pull can actually draw the 2 fire fronts toward one another, closing the distance faster than wind alone would explain. Once the gap closes and the fires connect, you no longer have 2 separate combustion events. You have one significantly larger convective system, generating more heat, pulling in more wind, and in some cases producing fire-generated winds strong enough to loft embers well ahead of the main fire front, a phenomenon officials refer to as long-range spotting. That is precisely the language used in this week's official updates on the bench fire, warning of extreme fire behavior, wind-driven runs, and long-range spotting potential, which is about as direct a warning as an incident management team issues. This is not a new phenomenon in Oregon. In August of 2002, two large fires in southwest Oregon, the Sour Biscuit Fire and the larger Florence Fire, closed the gap between them and merged into a single blaze that ultimately burned more than 333,000 acres under the retained name of the Biscuit Fire. That merger became one of the largest fires in Oregon's modern history, and it is the clearest historical proof that when major fires combine, the resulting system behaves differently than either fire did on its own, typically faster, hotter, and significantly harder to predict. And it is worth understanding just how much energy we are actually talking about when a fire system reaches this size. A single acre of dry timber and brush, once fully involved, can release heat output on the scale of hundreds of megawatts for the duration it burns. Scale that across even a fraction of the acreage currently active in Central Oregon, and you are looking at a combined energy release that dwarfs most industrial processes humans build on purpose. That energy does not stay contained to the ground. It drives the convective columns I just described thousands of feet into the atmosphere, sometimes high enough to form pyrocumulus clouds, fire-generated storm clouds that can produce their own erratic downdraft winds capable of pushing flame fronts in directions that have nothing to do with the prevailing regional wind pattern. That is part of why incident commanders describe fire behavior on nights like the one that overran the bench fire's containment line as extreme and wind-driven rather than simply fast. It is not just moving with the wind. In moments, it is generating conditions that make its own path harder to forecast, which is precisely why crews on the ground sometimes have only minutes, not hours, to reposition safely. Oregon has lived through this scale of event before, and each time, the lessons learned reshaped how the state prepares for the next one. The 2020 Labor Day fires, driven by an unusual and extreme east wind event, destroyed thousands of homes in a single 36-hour period, and remain the deadliest wildfire event in modern Oregon history. The 2021 season pushed past 800,000 acres statewide, prompting a $220 million state investment in wildfire prevention, preparedness, and response the following year. The 2024 season then broke the all-time record with nearly 2 million acres burned, and the Durkee Fire alone consuming close to 294,000 acres in eastern Oregon. Each of those seasons expanded the resource base, the mutual aid agreements, and the emergency declaration authority that state agencies are drawing on right now in 2026. The system responding to this week's mergers is not improvising. It is executing playbooks built directly from the hardest lessons of the last 5 years, which is part of why containment on the Rowe Creek Complex has been able to climb to 35%, even while burning across more than 200,000 acres of difficult terrain. Let's talk about who is actually out there fighting this right now, because behind every acreage number is a real operational effort involving thousands of people making difficult tactical decisions under extreme pressure. Jessica Newyar, Public Affairs Officer for the Oregon Department of Forestry, has been one of the clearest voices on the ground this week, and what she said should reframe how you think about the danger here. She said that conditions right now are so dry that any small ember could potentially start the next large wildfire. She also said fire conditions across the state are extremely susceptible, meaning even the smallest spark can take off into a large fire. That is not hype. That is an operational assessment from the person coordinating firefighting resources across the entire state, and it tells you something critical, which is that the danger here is not just the fires currently burning. It is the underlying fuel and weather conditions that could turn any new ignition, human-caused or otherwise, into the next bench fire or the next Rowe Creek Complex within hours. Governor Kotick has responded to the scale of this by invoking Oregon's Emergency Conflagration Act, a legal mechanism that allows the state to mobilize structural firefighting resources beyond what a local jurisdiction could deploy on its own 10 separate times this season. 3 of those invocations happened on a single day this past weekend, covering the Shingle Fire in Grant and Wheeler counties and the Beachcomb and Bench fires in Jefferson County. A 10th invocation covered the Second Flat Fire in Harney County, which has burned approximately 77,000 acres on its own. 10 conflagration declarations in a single season is an extraordinary operational tempo, and it tells you that state resources are being stretched across an unusually wide geographic footprint at the same time, which is exactly why officials have said outright that firefighting resources are stretched thin. I want you to actually picture what that strain looks like from the inside, because the acreage numbers can make this feel abstract. The Oregon Department of Forestry confirmed it has no remaining available complex incident management teams left to deploy. That is not a minor administrative detail. Incident management teams are the specialized command structures that coordinate strategy, logistics, and safety across a large fire. And when a state runs out of them, every new complex that ignites has to be managed with whatever leadership capacity can be assembled on short notice, sometimes pulled in from neighboring states or federal partners through mutual aid compacts. On the Rowe Creek Complex alone, more than 1,300 personnel are currently assigned, supported by dozens of engines, dozers, and water tenders, working in rotating shifts that often stretch well past what most jobs would consider a normal workday, because fire does not pause for anyone's rest schedule. On the bench fire, 7 crews and 14 engines are trying to hold a 0% contained perimeter against terrain that includes a river crossing. The fire has already jumped once. Crews assigned to the Rowe Creek Complex have also been pulled to support tactical firing operations, deliberately burning out vegetation ahead of the main fire to rob it of fuel on the nearby Little Buck Fire, which shows you how thin the margin is between the resources available and the number of active fronts that need them. This is also where the honest uncertainty I mentioned earlier becomes operationally important, not just a caveat. When officials say they cannot yet confirm the full acreage of the Rowe Creek Complex because an infrared mapping flight has not covered the entire perimeter, that is not a failure of transparency. Infrared aircraft are themselves a limited resource, shared across every active complex in the state. And until one can fly a fire's full boundary at night, when the infrared signature is clearest against cooling ground temperatures, incident commanders are working with an incomplete picture of their own fire's edges. That means containment percentages you see reported today are best current estimates, not final numbers, and they can shift meaningfully once better mapping data comes in. I would rather walk you through that limitation honestly than hand you a number that sounds more precise than the underlying data actually supports. Now let's address something directly, because when a disaster like this dominates headlines, misinformation and oversimplification tend to follow close behind, and I would rather correct it than let it spread. Some of the chatter around this event has framed every fire currently burning in Oregon as if it is all one interconnected mega event, a single unstoppable wall of flame consuming the entire state. That is not accurate, and it actually undersells the real, specific risk in each individual location. These are multiple distinct fire complexes, separated by dozens, or in some cases over 100 miles, each with its own containment status, its own terrain, its own crews, and its own risk profile. The Rowe Creek Complex, at 35% contained, is in meaningfully better shape than the bench fire, at 0%. Treating them as one undifferentiated catastrophe actually makes it harder for people in specific counties to understand their specific risk level and specific evacuation status. The real verified danger is not a single unstoppable fire consuming Oregon. It is a statewide pattern of extreme fire weather, capable of producing multiple independent, fast-moving resource-straining incidents at the same time, and that distinction matters for how you should actually think about your own safety if you are in the region. Let's dissect a comparison that I think gets to the real heart of why some places are handling this better than others, because it is not just about the fire itself. It is about what was in place before the fire arrived. The Rowe Creek Complex, despite covering more than 200,000 acres, sits at 35% containment with more than 1,300 personnel, 66 engines, and 25 dozers assigned. That level of resourcing, combined with terrain and fuel type, has allowed crews to go direct on parts of the fire line, even during red flag wind warnings. Compare that to the bench fire at 0% containment, where the initial line built on night 1 was overrun within hours as the fire jumped the Deschutes River. Part of that difference comes down to how much warning time and resource pre-positioning existed before the fire behavior turned extreme. This is the pattern that shows up again and again in disaster response, not just in Oregon, but everywhere. The raw natural event, the lightning strike, the wind gust, the dry fuel, sets the stage, but the human toll and the property loss are shaped far more by preparation, resource positioning, and infrastructure decisions made in the weeks and months before the fire ever ignited than by the fire itself. Oregon's early June emergency declaration, weeks before any of this week's fires started, is exactly the kind of preemptive positioning that gives crews a fighting chance once conditions turn. Where that positioning was strongest, containment numbers are climbing. Where fires outran it, containment sits at 0. Now let's talk about air quality, because this is a part of the story that extends the danger zone far beyond the actual fire perimeters, into communities that are not directly threatened by flame, but are absolutely affected by smoke. The Oregon Department of Environmental Quality has issued an air quality advisory covering Baker, Crook, Gilliam, Grant, Harney, Jefferson, Malheur, Morrow, Umatilla, Union, Wallowa, Wasco, and Wheeler counties, with intermittent smoke and degraded air quality possible in Deschutes, eastern Douglas, Hood River, northern Jackson, northern Klamath, Lake, and Sherman counties as well. If you're counting, that is a smoke footprint touching well over a dozen counties, a significant portion of the state's landmass. And it means that even residents who are nowhere near an evacuation zone are still facing a real health risk this week, particularly anyone with asthma, COPD, heart conditions, young children, or older adults, all of whom are more vulnerable to fine particulate smoke exposure, even at moderate concentrations over multiple days. Here is what almost nobody covering this story is connecting clearly enough. This is not just a wildfire story. It is a story about how quickly a below-average start to fire season can flip into a record pace season once the right ignition event meets the right fuel and weather conditions. Going into July, Oregon's season looked mild. By July 20th, the state had already surpassed all of 2025's total burned acreage. By today, July 27th, the state has crossed 1 million acres, putting this season on a trajectory that, if it continues, could rival or exceed 2024's record-breaking season of nearly 2 million acres burned, the most destructive fire season in Oregon's recorded history, which cost the state more than $130 million in direct firefighting expenditures and nearly $317 million in total suppression costs. Let those numbers sit for a moment, because we are only at the end of July. Fire season in Oregon typically runs into late September, which means, by historical pace, the most dangerous stretch of this season may still be ahead of us, not behind us. That brings us to what is still building and has not yet peaked. The fires currently merged and burning are being driven by conditions that officials describe as extremely susceptible to further ignition. That means the risk is not only that existing fires, like the Bench Fire and the Rowe Creek Complex, continue to grow and potentially merge with still more nearby fires. It is that any new spark, a downed power line, an escaped campfire, a vehicle dragging a chain on pavement, dry lightning from the next thunderstorm cell, could ignite the next major fire in a landscape that is already primed to carry it explosively. This is why officials have been so direct in their public messaging this week. The danger is not contained to the current fire perimeters. It is present anywhere across the dry, wind-exposed portions of the state, and that risk profile is not expected to meaningfully change until the region sees sustained rainfall, which historically does not arrive in force until late September at the earliest. So let's talk about what you can actually do with this information, because I do not want to leave you with dread and nothing else. If you live in or near any of the affected counties, know your evacuation level before you need it. Level 1 means be ready, meaning you should be aware of the danger and begin preparing yourself and your household. Level 2 means be set, meaning you should be packed and prepared to leave at a moment's notice if the order is upgraded. Level 3 means go now, meaning there is no time left to pack, no time to gather sentimental items, and no time to hesitate. Oregon's Raptor map, along with County Sheriff's Office pages, Genesis Protect, Everbridge alert systems, and the Oregon State Fire Marshal's statewide wildfire map, are updated in near real time and are more reliable in a fast-moving situation than any single news broadcast, because conditions can change before a public release even goes out. The Sheriff's Office serving the Warm Springs area has also warned residents this week that power may still be out in some areas near the Bench and Beachcomb fires. So do not assume that a lack of visible flame near your home means the danger or the disruption has passed. If you are in an advisory zone for air quality rather than a direct evacuation zone, take it seriously anyway. Keep windows and doors closed, run air filtration if you have it. Even a simple box fan with a furnace filter attached can meaningfully reduce indoor particulate levels and limit outdoor exertion for anyone in the affected counties, which right now stretches from Baker and Malheur in the east to Hood River and northern Jackson in the west. Check in on older relatives or neighbors with asthma, COPD, or heart conditions, because wildfire smoke exposure is cumulative. A single afternoon outdoors might feel tolerable, but several consecutive days of degraded air quality carries real cardiovascular and respiratory risk, particularly for people who cannot easily relocate or seal their homes against smoke infiltration. If you live in a fire-prone area at all, whether or not you're currently under any evacuation notice, this week is the week to build or refresh your go bag with essential documents, medications, a change of clothes, water, and a battery-powered radio. Confirm your family's communication plan in case cell networks get overloaded or towers lose power, and agree in advance on an out-of-area contact everyone can check in with if local lines are jammed. Clear defensible space around your home if you have not already, removing dry brush, stacked firewood, and dead vegetation from within at least the first 30 feet of your house, because that buffer zone is consistently one of the strongest predictors of whether a structure survives an approaching fire or not. As Jessica Noyar put it plainly this week, right now even the smallest ember has the potential to become the next large wildfire. And that statement applies just as much to the vehicle chain dragging on pavement or the campfire someone thinks is fully out as it does to the next lightning strike. I want to bring this back to where we started, because the number that opened this video has not gotten smaller since we began. More than 1 million acres are burning across Oregon right now, spread across dozens of fires, several of which have merged into larger, more volatile complexes in just the past few days, and containment on some of the most dangerous ones still sits at 0%. This is not resolved. It is not close to resolved. What happens over the next several days, whether the current fires keep expanding into each other, whether new ignitions spark in already primed fuel, and whether the wind patterns that have been driving this crisis continue or finally ease, is going to determine how this season is remembered in Oregon's history. Whatever the containment percentages look like by this time tomorrow, the underlying pattern driving the season, early snowmelt, deep drought, dry lightning, and wind events arriving faster and harder than they used to, is not going away when this particular round of fires is finally controlled. I am going to keep tracking this hour by hour as new incident updates come in, and if you want to stay ahead of it rather than finding out after the fact, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. If you know anyone in Central or Eastern Oregon, particularly around Warm Springs, Fossil, or Gilliam County, share this with them directly, because real-time, accurate information is one of the few things that genuinely helps people make faster, safer decisions when conditions are moving this quickly. Drop a comment if you are watching this from an affected area. I am reading everyone, and I will be back the moment there's a significant update on containment, evacuations, or any new merger that changes the picture on the ground. Stay safe out there, stay ready, and I will talk to you the moment this situation shifts again.